You're not in control. You're in a carefully managed avoidance strategy. You organize your schedule, you clean your room, you build routines, take cold showers, chase productivity. But beneath that discipline, something else is moving. Something you've never dared to name. Control wasn't born out of strength. It was born the moment you broke and didn't have the space to fall apart. Somewhere in a quiet chapter of your past, chaos knocked on your door. Maybe it came as violence, maybe as neglect or silence or betrayal, and you built a system, not to live, but to survive. That's the truth. You're not organizing life. You're containing chaos, like a dam holding back a flood you've never let yourself feel. A flood named grief, rage, shame, abandonment. A flood you were too young or too alone to face. Carl Jung said it simply: the ego constructs illusions of order to protect itself from the confrontation with the unconscious. Your control is that illusion. And behind it, there's a wound, still open, still unspoken. You thought control would save you, but it became a cage built from rituals, alarms, rules. You think you're managing your future, but you're really negotiating with your past. You're begging it not to come back. Schopenhauer called it the greatest illusion, the idea that we can dominate life. But life isn't meant to be dominated, it's meant to be felt, even when it breaks you. There's a reason rest feels like failure. There's a reason you panic when the plan falls apart. There's a reason peace feels like a trap, because for you, safety never meant stillness, it meant control. And now your entire nervous system is trained to equate spontaneity with danger, to equate chaos with trauma, to equate letting go with collapse. But here's the real fracture. In trying to protect yourself, you've numbed yourself. You don't feel joy, you don't feel love, you don't feel seen. Because control keeps you hidden, even from yourself. You've been mopping the floor while the house burns from underneath, and you've gotten so good at it, you started to believe the fire wasn't real. But it is. It always was. So let me ask you a question. What is your need for control actually protecting you from feeling? Because until you answer that, you won't be living. You'll just be surviving, elegantly, quietly, invisibly. And that is its own kind of death. You don't crave order. You fear what happens when it's gone. That's the part no one sees when they admire your self-discipline, your to-do lists, your perfectly timed mornings. They see control. What they don't see is the grief it's holding back. Control is a dam. And on the other side of that dam, there's a flood. Not just any flood, but one made of moments you never got to grieve. A parent who wasn't present. A childhood marked by walking on eggshells. The day you stopped crying because it no longer changed anything. That grief never left. It just got organized, scheduled, hidden behind achievements, goals, consistency. But the wound is still there. And every time you feel close to losing control, it rises. In the pit of your stomach, in the tightening of your jaw, in the panic behind your eyes. You think you're just being responsible. But really, you're running from a silence you're afraid will swallow you. You've mistaken structure for healing, but this kind of structure doesn't heal. It hides. It silences the scream, but it doesn't stop the bleeding. And maybe no one ever taught you how to feel without breaking. Maybe crying once meant weakness. Maybe rest once meant being forgotten. So now you stay busy, always, because if you stop, you might remember. And if you remember, you might collapse. But this grief, this ancient, quiet grief, it's not your enemy. It's the part of you that still wants to be seen. Because numbness isn't peace, it's exile. And that's what control becomes, a kingdom built on silence, where your real self is locked in the basement. You call it discipline, but your soul calls it distance. And there's only so long you can live without coming home to yourself. You are not cold, you're frozen. And even ice melts when the fire of truth touches it. You think you're in charge now. You speak like an adult. You plan like an adult. But your reactions still belong to someone much younger. That tightness in your chest when someone raises their voice, that impulse to please, to withdraw, to over-explain, that fear of being seen too closely or not seen at all. It wasn't your adult self who built those instincts. It was the child version of you, the one who learned to adapt under pressure, under threat, under silence. The problem is, that child never stepped down. They just grew quieter and took the wheel from behind the scenes. Jung understood this. He knew that the inner child, when left unacknowledged, doesn't disappear. It becomes the ruler of your unconscious world. It makes choices for you, not to move you forward, but to keep you safe, even if that safety costs you connection, joy, authenticity. You're not broken. You're repeating patterns that once protected you, but now imprison you. And it's so subtle. You think it's just your personality. But look closer. Why do you panic when you're misunderstood? Why does praise make you suspicious and criticism feel like betrayal? Why does intimacy make you want to disappear? These aren't adult responses. These are childhood wounds, still speaking in adult circumstances. You see, the inner child isn't just a metaphor. It's the emotional age where you stopped feeling safe. And unless you meet that version of you, not with shame but with recognition, they will keep designing your life. They will keep reacting for you. They will keep whispering in the back of your mind, don't trust, don't feel, don't change. Because to them, change still means danger. To them, letting go of control still means being abandoned. So here you are, an adult, polishing the dashboard, while a scared child drives the car. You've tried. New habits, new schedules, new tools, morning routines, digital detox, meditation apps. You've redesigned your life so many times, it almost looks stable, but nothing sticks. Because deep down, you know the problem was never your routine. It was the story you were running from. You're not evolving, you're decorating your prison cell, making the walls prettier, smoother, more manageable. But the wound doesn't live in your systems, it lives in your silence, in the version of you who was never allowed to speak the truth. In the emotion you buried the moment it became too loud to survive. You think you're growing because you're busy, but growth without confrontation is just avoidance dressed in discipline. And still, you're exhausted. Not because you're lazy, but because you're keeping yourself distant from the one thing that could free you, the memory you've locked away, the pain you've intellectualized, the shame you've disguised as motivation. Self-improvement has become your anesthesia. Another way to avoid collapse, by staying productive. Another way to silence the scream, by keeping it efficient. But healing isn't an upgrade, it's a reckoning. It's the moment you stop organizing your pain and start listening to it. Because until then, every new chapter will feel like a repetition. Every transformation will be temporary. Every success will feel hollow. Not because you didn't try hard enough, but because you tried without touching the real question. What if the part of you that needs fixing is just the part that's never been heard? At some point, something shattered. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deep enough that it rewired the way you relate to the unknown. Maybe it was a moment when safety vanished without warning, or when someone you trusted changed overnight, or when the ground beneath you proved it could disappear. Ever since then, you've lived with a quiet rule. If I can predict it, it can't hurt me. And so you plan everything. You analyze, you preempt, you control. Not because you love order, but because chaos once left a scar so deep, you vowed never to feel that powerless again. What looks like perfectionism is often the residue of trauma, of a nervous system still trying to guarantee that nothing will ever fall apart like it did before. But the cost is intimacy. The cost is spontaneity. The cost is presence. You become so busy preparing for pain that you forget how to let joy arrive unannounced. You stop trusting moments that weren't scheduled, words that weren't rehearsed, love that wasn't carefully managed. And slowly, life stops surprising you, not because it became dull, but because you made it predictable. Control becomes your drug. not to feel high, but to avoid the crash. But here's the tragedy. Healing doesn't come from that kind of certainty. It comes from contact with what is raw, with what is unplanned, with what is real, even when it's uncertain. You don't crave order. You crave the illusion that nothing will ever hurt you again. But that illusion is just that, an illusion. And every time you grip it tighter, you drift further from what makes life worth touching. It should feel good to rest. But for you, stillness feels like a threat, like something's wrong, like something's coming, like something was forgotten. Because your body doesn't associate calm with safety. It associates calm with exposure. When the noise stops, your thoughts get louder. When the tension fades, the memories return. When the world slows down, the ghosts show up. This isn't weakness, it's residue. The residue of a nervous system that had to stay alert for too long. Of years spent anticipating the next blow, the next disappointment, the next abandonment. And now, when there's nothing to fight, nothing to fix, you flinch. As if peace were camouflage for an ambush. You learn to survive in high alert, so now safety feels unfamiliar. And what is unfamiliar feels dangerous. You scroll, you overthink, you stay busy, because the quiet starts to hum with anxiety, because the moment you relax, your body panics, not out of logic, but out of memory. That's the paradox. The more you crave peace, the more unsafe it feels when it arrives. And unless you understand that this reaction isn't your fault, you'll keep mistaking your trauma response for your personality. You'll say, "I just don't know how to rest." But what you really mean is, rest feels like waiting for the fall. You'll say, "I like to keep busy." But what you really mean is, "I don't trust what surfaces when I'm still." Because somewhere along the line you learned stillness doesn't mean safety. It means vulnerability. It means facing everything you once had to outrun. So now, even peace feels like war. And the only way out is through that battlefield of memory. To reintroduce your body, gently, slowly, to the idea that calm isn't a trap. It's the door back to yourself. A door your trauma taught you to fear, but one your soul has never stopped knocking on. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You want to be seen, but only on your terms. You crave closeness, but not the kind that unravels you. You want connection, but not if it threatens the mask. You've built your identity like armor, polished, presentable, protected, and now even love feels like a risk. Because real intimacy isn't curated, it's messy, it sees you. Not your version of control, not the script you rehearsed, not the smile you wear when you're drowning, but the part of you that's raw, confused, exhausted, the part you don't let anyone meet because you're afraid they'll run. So instead, you perform. You manage how you're perceived, you filter your emotions, you calculate what's safe to share and what must be hidden at all costs. But that's the paradox. You can't control and connect at the same time because connection asks for presence, not perfection. And presence demands vulnerability, not strategy. So you end up alone, even when you're surrounded, even when someone says they love you, because deep down, you know, they only know the version of you that felt safe enough to be seen. Not the fractured one, not the ashamed one, not the one who built the control just to survive. But the truth is, love can't reach through a wall you're still holding up. And as long as control is your priority, intimacy will always feel like a threat. Not because others don't want to know you, but because you're too afraid to let them meet the version of you that still believes. Being truly seen might mean being abandoned, so you keep performing and call it being strong. But strength isn't the absence of mess, it's the courage to let someone see it and stay. There's a part of you that wants to fall apart, and there's another part, louder, stricter, colder, that won't let you. You hold yourself together with routines, roles, responsibilities. You function, you endure, but inside something is fracturing, quietly, relentlessly, not because you're weak, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself that keeps pretending this is enough. There is a collapse waiting for you, but it's not the kind you think. It's not destruction, it's release. It's the moment the mask finally slips and you don't rush to fix it. Control keeps you functioning, but it also keeps you fragmented. You show up, you deliver, you respond. But who's doing all that? The real you? Or the performance you've mastered so well you forgot it was a disguise? Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. But wholeness doesn't come from perfection. It begins in the breakdown, in the death of who you thought you had to be. The collapse you fear might be the first honest moment of your life, the moment you stop managing yourself like a project and start meeting yourself like a person. The part of you that longs to fall apart is the part of you still alive, still reaching, still remembering that life isn't meant to be endured, it's meant to be felt, even when it burns, even when it breaks you open. Because only then can something real begin. Not the version you built to survive, but the one buried beneath the survival. And yes, it's terrifying. To let go, to let yourself collapse. But maybe collapse isn't the end. Maybe it's the threshold, the place where the old self dies and the real self begins to breathe. Every detail you micromanage, every overreaction that surprises even you, every plan you obsess over until it's flawless. It's not about now, it's about then. A moment you barely remember, but that never stopped echoing. A memory that was too heavy to carry, so your mind buried it, and then built an entire system to protect it. You think you're being logical, you think you're being careful, but really, you're just staying one step ahead of a past you never got to process. You don't crave control, you crave safety from something that already happened and still lives in your nervous system. Trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it organizes your life, quietly, efficiently, invisibly, until you're no longer reacting to the present, but negotiating with ghosts. That's the most painful part. You're not protecting yourself from the world. You're protecting yourself from a version of yourself, the one who once didn't make it through unscathed, the one who had to toughen up before it was time, the one who still doesn't believe the danger is over. So you plan, you predict, you control. Not because life is chaotic, but because something in you still is. This isn't about being a perfectionist, it's about being haunted. Haunted by a pain you never asked for, a wound that never got named, a silence that got mistaken for strength. But here's the quiet truth. Your life isn't ruled by the present. It's ruled by a wound pretending to be logic. And until that wound is felt, not fixed, you'll keep trying to control everything except the one thing that needs your attention, the memory that made you who you are, and the person underneath it, still waiting to be met. You've spent years holding it all together, tightening every screw, measuring every move, not because you wanted power, but because you were afraid of what might break if you loosened your grip. But here's what no one told you. Control has a price. And sometimes the cost is yourself. You've traded spontaneity for safety, closeness for certainty, freedom for the illusion that nothing unpredictable can touch you again. But underneath all that structure, there's a weight, a tiredness. Not from doing too much, but from carrying too much alone. Carl Jung said, integration begins when the ego admits defeat and lets the shadow speak, not to collapse, but to finally become whole. You weren't wrong to build defenses. You were just too young to know they would one day become your cage. And now, you're not broken. You're just exhausted from protecting a pain that deserves to be witnessed, not managed. Schopenhauer once wrote, "Compassion is the basis of morality." And that includes the compassion we deny ourselves, the kind of compassion that doesn't fix or explain or optimize, but simply sits beside the wound and stays. You've done everything you could to control your world. But maybe the most powerful act left is surrender, not to fate, not to chaos, but to yourself, to the version of you that never got to be held and still hopes it's not too late. So here it is, without decoration, without drama, you are not the controller. You are the one who was never held. And yes, there is still time to come home to yourself.